Joining us again is Richard Goldberg. Richard is a business professor at Columbia University School of International and Public Affairs. He's also the author of The Battle for Wall Street, also a senior advisor at the investment bank Needham Co. This hour, we've also been joined by Bill Cohan, the author of House of Cards and a Bloomberg contributing editor. Gentlemen, thanks for sitting here and listening to the hearings with me. I guess what I'm really concerned and interested in learning here is what exactly did Bear Stearns do that was wrong, and whether that was just as bad as Main Street's viewing Goldman Sachs right now. Who wants to start?
Well, I mean, wrong and right. I mean, they made poor business judgments. They didn't have the governance in place from the board level to grapple with the businesses that they were in. They were too heavily reliant on mortgage-backed securities, too heavily reliant on financing themselves in the overnight and short-term financing markets. In effect, they gave their creditors a vote every night about whether to do business with them. And, you know, I think it's ironic that we are in the process of lambasting Goldman Sachs publicly for being smart enough to figure out the dangers in the mortgage market and turning around their battleship and making $4 billion in 2007 from that decision, as opposed to these other firms that didn't do that and washed down the tubes.
Richard, could Bear Stearns face civil charges similar to what Goldman is facing from the SEC right now? You know, you bring in this issue of moral hazard.
I would call it ignorance charges.
Okay.
Again, I would go back to a theme of intellectual failure.
So nothing illegal.
Not that I'm not close enough.
Well,
for that.
They were, you know, the two Bear Stearns hedge funds were put on trial. They were found not guilty. There's no question that
because the jurors, right, said that they'd invest their money with those hedge funds.
Well, that was what some of those jurors said when they came out of the room, which was shocking. But there's no question that Goldman wasn't doing anything different than Bear Stearns or Merrill or Lehman. They were all in the synthetic CDO market. They were all creating CDOs. They were all creating mortgage-backed securities. But you know, Goldman was much more diversified. Goldman made this decision to refocus their business and go short the market, whereas you know, Bear and Lehman and Merrill were long the market, hugely long.
Bear Stearns wanted to be a hedge fund. Bear Stearns wanted to be Goldman Sachs. They didn't have the sandbox to play in it. They didn't have the size, the depth, the diversification that William's pointing out. They wanted to be like their big brother, Goldman Sachs, but didn't have the breadth or depth to play in that market. So am I surprised by this? No.
So Richard, tell me about this think tank you're working to put together at your organization, at your school, to really kind of improve corporate governance. You know, it sort of sounds to me like it dovetails in with the whole financial regulatory reform era that we're in here right now.
Well, one of the things we're working on is systemic risk, as William knows, is a real issue. And what we don't want to do is have you invite us back here in a few years and talk about the next failure. What we're doing at Columbia, particularly at the international school, led by the dean, is to put together an economic governance institute that actually focuses on governance, not only within firms like Bear Stearns, but outside firms like Bear Stearns, how we can work with boards of directors, how we can work with management, how we can work with the different constituencies to try to avoid some of these issues, and more importantly, going back to a theme we keep raising here today, avoid intellectual failure.
Speaking of which, I want to get a little preview of what to expect. Former SEC Chairman Chris Cox. We only have a couple of seconds here, Bill. Send it back to you. Were Cox's hands as tightly as he's claiming they were in the whole regulation?
I mean, I feel like he was out surfing when he should have been focusing on regulating these firms, which just did not happen. And there's no way of getting around it. It'll be interesting to hear what he has to say.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for the discussion today.